thank you all for staying on a Friday night. I've much appreciated. To actually have an audience, I'm very impressed. So I was asked by Jamie to speak at this conference and to end with an inspiring speech. And I was sort of sat there thinking, as usual, with my Facebook on and interacting with people on Facebook about what would be an inspiring story. And I was thinking back to the time of when we ran harm reduction services in East London with the Healthy Options team. I thought, I've told those stories so many times that actually I'm not sure what's new in those stories to tell anymore. And then as things happen on Facebook, a song came up, and I just want to play you a little bit of this song.
Una mattina mi sono svegliato con bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Una mattina mi sono svegliato e ho trovato l'invasore. Partigiano, portami via. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Partigiano, portami via, perché mi sento di morire. E se muoio da partigiano, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Se muoio da partigiano, che tu mi devi seppellire lassù in montagna. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao.
So, why I play this Italian song to you? Well, it's an Italian partisan song that was set up during the Second World War period, when fascism was a major issue across the whole of Europe, and that was the social struggle of the time between the people who believed in justice and human rights and the people who sought to impose their values and views on other people. And this reminded me of a story I'd never told about. And the reason I'd never told it was because it was about one of my colleagues, a guy called Massimo Luzzu. And Massimo was our first Italian worker at the Healthy Options team. He was a drug user living with HIV, and he had a very strange pathway into our own agency and a rather sad exit from our agency, which I want to tell you some highlights of, and in it to draw on that story to tell you some reasons why I think needle exchange is something that's so important in all of our lives. And as you can tell, it was a reasonably cathartic process for me, because this was a person who eventually died, and I never grieved for him because I agreed with his family not to tell his story publicly, because although he was one of our heroes and is one of our heroes, his family had the right to grieve, and his family had the right to deal with their son and their husband as family members. So actually this process has been a rather challenging one in terms of actually just really starting to try to find what in this story was inspiring, because that was my mandate. And the first thing to recognise was Massimo came from Sardinia, and his father was an Italian partisan. So when his country didn't understand what its policies were, and his country got lost and supported fascism, he never got lost. Him and his brothers went into the mountains and they fought the fascists, and they fought for liberty in their country. I had the privilege to meet his father at a later point in his life, and to explore some of those times with him, and to compare those times with the times of the HIV epidemic that we were then right in the midst of. And as this song says, this is a song which says, it's basically the partisans saying goodbye to their girlfriends and saying, we're going into the mountains, we're going to fight, we feel death is coming, but we will fight for liberty. And if I die, plant me under a flower in the side of the mountain, and when people pass, they will say, that flower is beautiful. It is the flower of the partisan who fought for our liberty. So that's the reference point I want to use for this, telling you some stories about Massimo and drawing on some reflections. But I want to acknowledge two people, and I want to dedicate this speech to two people, which is to the two people who basically brought me to this work with the Italian drug using community. And this was a doctor called Dr. Eduardo Barakat, an Argentinian doctor who worked in St Clement's drug dependency unit, And he, in his spare time as a gay man, he had a resonance with the HIV epidemic. He got it as a psychiatrist and as a gay man, as a human being, straight away. And he made connection. He didn't have judgment with drug users. He linked his worlds, and he went out and helped people. He ran a prescribing service, which he wasn't really meant to do, and he did without the consultants all necessarily knowing about it, and he helped people in a way that, was about looking after people as human beings. And he went in his evenings to the Italian church, where he worked with this great priest called Father Carmelo, who was another revolutionary communist Catholic priest banished to London because he was too revolutionary. But when he got there, he found all these drug users with HIV, and rather than just working for this conservative Anglo-Catholic community, he took on the drug-using community as his congregation, and he visited them in prisons, and he had the keys to Brixton Jail, and he could literally just walk into these prisons because he was trusted so much by the prison system. So this speech is dedicated to these two men who could see connection in community and could step across the line to reach out to the drug-using community when it was most in need. Because the drug-using community, the Italian drug-using community in East London, was a refugee community. They were a refugee community from the bad drug policy of Italy. Just like the Scottish drug users, who made up my other major population of people I serviced, were refugees from bad Scottish drugs policy at that time. Where actually, the police attempts to limit the amounts of syringes going into communities was actually leading and driving and firing the HIV epidemic, rather than actually, as we see now with much more aligned police working, that we've moved into a different state of play. So I was handed this mandate, because actually Edward died himself. Edward had died, and I was really handed this mantle of looking after the Italian drug-using community. And I had a drug-using peer, or a drug user who was one of my clients at that time, called Mariano. And I was, at that point, that was the early HIV days where we were getting a lot of money, and I was bidding for money for the project. And I realised we needed an Italian worker, because I was going out and sitting in the middle of these squats with all these Italian drug users, and I was sitting there with a bag of syringes, and everybody was talking around me, and I'm just sitting there going, what the bloody hell am I doing here? I don't understand a single thing that's happening. I realised that giving the syringes out is important, but actually these Italian drug users are doing it for themselves. I need to enable this, not to be the person here doing the work. So Mariano was my target worker, and this story has a very sort of Italian flavour to it, but literally at the point where we got funding for Mariano's post, Mariano, who also had HIV, was dying in a hospice bed. And I had an inappropriate bedside conversation with him where I said, look, Mariano, I really appreciate that you're dying, and I know this is a totally inappropriate thing to ask you, but I've just got funding for this Italian worker. It was your job. Who am I going to give this job to? And he looked at me, and he was really, very close to death at this point, and he was sitting there saying, well, he couldn't think of anybody to start with. And I said, look, think of someone like yourself, someone who's got the standing in the Italian community that the other users respect, that people turn to if they have problems, who is trusted by people. I said, I don't care who they are, just who has that status? And his eyes lit up, and he went, well, there's Massimo. And I said, great, and he explained who Massimo was, and Massimo was a local heroin dealer. And or a heroin supplier, because he was real old school heroin supplier. He was one of those people who looked after his customers. He looked after the people he cared for. He gave them tick if they were in problems. He helped them if they were getting into problems with their drugs. He coached them, he supported them. So he played naturally the role that we were asking him to play as an outreach worker in his community before we even got there. And then I said to him, well, how do I reach him? And he said, well, unfortunately, he's in Brixton Prison at the moment. He's just coming to the end of a 5-year stretch. And in fact, this is the third 5-year stretch he'd just done, because at that time, our drug scene was run by Stoke Newington Police Station. And if you didn't deal drugs for Stoke Newington Police Station, they walked into your house, put a kilo of heroin on the table and said, you're going to jail. And Massimo, because he was such an honourable man, and he was a Sardinian through and through, wouldn't cooperate with the police. And so they put him in jail 3 times for 5 years. And I think one of the things as I go through this story, is to draw on some of the reflections of change. Now look at where we are with our police now. Look at how far we've progressed. Now, from those early days where we took the risks of training police officers, of exposing ourselves as harm reduction workers, of having police buses outside needle exchanges, we now have joint programs with the police. Now we now have collaboration with the police. Yes, of course the police are still called upon to enact ridiculous drug control legislation in this country, and that's a different story. But actually, when I go around the world and see police forces full of corruption, full of brutality in other parts of the world, for all the calling to order that we should carry on doing with the police, we have moved on markedly in this journey. And I think that's one of the stories, one of the storylines of optimism that comes out of this story. But so I went to Brixton Prison and interviewed Massimo in jail and offered him the job. And we said when he came out 6 months later, he got a job. Now this was the early HIV days. We got away with doing things in those days that were somewhat bonkers. But I'm really glad we did, because Massimo came onto our team and was just an amazing worker. He brought this respect to the team, this credibility with the Italian drug using community, and we just suddenly accessed the whole Italian drug using community, and we were able to share expertise, understand what their issues were, interact with them, work with faith leaders to actually support their needs as people who have faith, to work with their families, to interact with the situations they were facing. And Massimo was on methadone, so he was our first ever staff member on methadone, and one of the first drug workers in the UK to be openly employed on methadone. And we had problems. We had local drug agencies who refused. When we asked to be sponsored to go into local prisons, we asked a local NGO to help us in that, and they refused to nominate us because they said they would only support the workers without methadone to go into the prisons. So we went to the probation service and they nominated us to go into prisons, and we worked in 4 or 5 prisons across London with workers who were on methadone and who were able to do a perfectly capable job. And one of Massimo's great braveries was that he took the flak on this. He was our front man on this. So he was the one who other workers, particularly ex-drug users, came and complained to me constantly about, why are you letting this person on methadone? Somehow as if it invalidated their recovery journeys that he was working on methadone. And of course the reality was that he had far greater credibility than they did in the drug using community, and that's why they struggled to have him being given legitimacy in the work that he was doing. And I think this is an area where we've lost ground. No, we were doing much better back in the 90s around the employment of people who use drugs. Now, I used to be a general manager and a professional head of drug services. I officially can't work in the UK at the moment because I'm a public drug user and I came out as a drug user. Now, that's crazy, and I see the number of drug workers who have to hide their drug use, or peer workers and service user workers who have to all pretend to be abstinent to comply with a system that is just crazy. Now, you're not respecting our expertise. Now, engage us honestly, and I'm not saying that to you, this is a more widespread comment to the system. But I think importantly, while raising that criticism of the systemic system, look around. Look at the collaboration that takes place on the ground between drug users and harm reduction workers. It's now embedded in the way we work. We do it on social media, we do it in projects, we do it in cafes, we do it in just friendships that we have developed over the course of this struggle. So I think it's important to say that systemically we've gone back, but actually culturally we're moving forward. And I think that's the great thing about the harm reduction movement. Government gets policy wrong because at times, politicians get far too involved in areas like drug policy because it's an easy political win. We know that politicians consistently support drug law reform privately and publicly will demonise drug users and scapegoat us for their own political benefits. So we know that this is not a scientific argument, but we have to do this dance, and what we do is hold on to the culture, hold on to the belief, hold on to the working principles, and let the government catch up with us. And at certain points, we hope the policy system will change again. And I would like to commend the UK harm reduction movement for the way it has just accommodated and got on with working with drug users. And the boundaries and relationships are just so integrated now that whatever policies they bring in around employment, they can't undermine that, because that's the way we are. So back to Massimo. Massimo was a man of the mountain, and that's why this story is so relevant to him. He actually went on, I'm not going to tell the story because it's too long, but he went on the run from the police in Italy for a period of time and lived wild on the mountains for 18 months because he was a wild Sardinian man. He flew golden eagles, and he actually flew golden eagles and he took great pleasure in eating all the bits of fishes. I was a vegetarian at the time, and he would eat the gills and the eyes just to see me sort of looking sort of queasy on the other side of the table. And he actually brought himself a golden eagle while living in East London in a council flat. And so there would be times at lunchtime where he would go, I'm just going off to fly the eagle. And he would not come back for a couple of hours. But when a staff member comes back to you and says, look, what's happened? Where were you? Where's your lunch break's gone on for a bit long? He said, sorry, I flew the eagle up in the air and it flew off, and he had to walk for about 3 hours to catch the eagle back again. And it was always very difficult at that point to sort of somehow it is one of the best excuses for coming back late from lunch that I've ever really had put to them. It was a hard one to really resist, but of course you did have to go and pick your eagle up from the other side. I do get it. how appropriate it is to be flying a golden eagle across East London. No, that was the contradiction of this rather symbolic and rather amazing man. And he was in many ways this challenge of being a man of the mountains living in an urban setting. Because of his criminal background, he'd fled. In fact, the police visited his family every month to make sure he hadn't gone home, and persecuted his family throughout the whole of his life because of the way the Italian police are. And he brought this Sardinian principle, this Sardinian way of doing things. And one of the things that happened throughout that time was that Massimo cared for many of our friends who died. And we all looked after our friends who died. But when they're your clients and clients you become friendly with, that's one thing. When they're all your mates that you've grown up with, they're all your best friends, they're all the people you used to use with, that's a whole different level of caring that it takes. And he just took it and he took it and he took it as we cared for 60 people who died over a 10-year period in East London during that time. And there's no Christmases we would lose 5 people over every Christmas. We always knew we would at the peak of the epidemic. And I went to New York and I spoke to the New York outreach team and they said that's how many we lose every week. And it's just about remembering where we were at that time. In preparing for this, I got out a photograph of that period and I looked at one of our first Christmas parties at Hot. And I then looked at the photograph and I was going, oh, I remember that person, oh, I remember this person. And then I realised that of all the drug users in the picture, I was the only one left alive. The only one left alive. And why? Because I started injecting in this era with needle exchange. So I was able to always use clean injecting equipment. I didn't inject in the period of the HIV epidemic. So I wasn't exposed to HIV like all those other people were. And it's that simplicity of the story that we're all part of that I think we have to hold on to and remember. And remembering that we were sitting there watching our epidemic prevalence up at 5% in London at that time. And we knew that if you hit 10%, you suddenly jumped to about 50%. And that was the story of Milan, it was the story of Dublin, it was the story of Edinburgh, where we were sending from Hot needles and syringes up to Edinburgh for the illegal needle exchanges run by our peer friends at that time. Now, that was the nature of the battle at that time. It was tooth and nail. We really seriously thought that our community could be wiped out, or at least it would be decimated. It would be left truly ripped to pieces. And we saw friends dying deaths that no young person should die. People dying of pneumonia, people dying of horrible cancers, people dying of dementia, things that you just shouldn't see young people dying of. And I think those storylines, and I always remember at Hot, we'd send all the staff team home. It was the problem in that area was getting people to go home, because it just felt like these precious moments we had with people to give them dignity in their deaths were just too important. And the numbers of times I would go after tea, well, I'm just going to pop out and have a look round, and I get round there and there would be Massimo, there would be all the other staff members, because actually in that time it was more than just a job. It was a sense of we were responding to this potential tidal wave of virus that was wiping out our community. And then back to Massimo, one day I came across him in the drop-in, and it was a busy time. We were starting to turn the epidemic, we were starting to see positives coming in. And I found Massimo, and my personal library was something that I left. But my personal library was something that I left in the office so that people could read. And I came across Massimo writing in the front of one of my textbooks. And I said to him, Massimo, what the fuck are you doing, man? You're writing in one of my books. And he looked at me with this moment, and at that moment both of us, and he went, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. And at that moment both of us looked at each other, and I knew that his worst fear had come true, which is that he started to have age-related dementia. And he went on to die of age-related dementia, and we cared for him as a team, even though he was based in South London, because he was one of our own. And we worked with local nursing teams to give him a dignified death in his home. And we were able to get his family to come over and to see him for a last time, and we had this horrific journey, in the midst of the period where the London traffic was frozen up all the time, of getting his parents literally to his deathbed just at the moment where he died. And as I was talking to his mother afterwards, she said to me, I lost my brothers, my husband lost his brothers, we lost nearly a whole generation of men fighting the Nazis in the Second World War. And here we are again, one generation later, losing our whole male population again. And that was the impact that HIV had in Italy among injecting drug users. It wiped out whole populations. And every person who died had a family. Every person who died left behind lost opportunity, left behind scars in their family lives, left behind unmet possibility. And I think it's important that we just hold on to that and remember that. That's why we do what we do. But I think it's important, before I depress you all completely, is to say, and try to come back to a little bit of inspiration, is to say that's not the end of the story. It's not the end of the story. Here we are nearly 15 years later. 15 years later. And yes, the times are difficult. Yes, our backs are to the wall in terms of drug policy. And yes, as the song says, we seem to have suddenly woken up and been invaded. And while I want to make friends with our recovery, people involved in recovery, I'm not having people in recovery dictating to me as an active drug user what harm reduction should look like. That is the job of active drug users in dialogue with harm reduction workers. Our recovery friends can contribute to that conversation, but as they dominate that conversation, they disrespect us as active drug users and don't respect our right to be actively involved in our own lives. But I think it's important, positively, after my little rant, to say that we have also to remember, we now have antiretroviral treatment. It is not normal for people in this country to die when they become infected with HIV. In fact, it's not normal in this country for people to become infected with HIV. Why? Because we have needle exchange. And we're still, despite all the attacks on OST and opiate substitution therapies like methadone, we're still holding on to it. Now, I'm disgraced. I think it's disgraceful the number of people I hear under pressure from their scripts. No, the people who I know, even on a forum yesterday, long-term drug users being forced off methadone by bullying drug workers. It's just not right. But we're defending against it. We're not giving up the code. No, and I think, no, look, the fact we're talking about drug consumption rooms, no, we're not just standing still, we're going forward. And I think just look at the innovation that's taken place in our scene. No, HIT carries on carrying a flag. Now, HIT's been, with the harm reduction cafes, a consistent, valiant defender of harm reduction. Exchange Supplies with all their innovation around needles and syringes. The work of U-Turn and others around naloxone. To just put practical resources out there for people. The video work that John's doing. The National Needle Exchange Workers Forum itself. And all the agencies that you work in, and apologies if I've missed anybody out who should be commended in this roundup, you're safe for injecting being what you're obviously one of them. So I think it's about saying, look at this innovation. However much we've been trying to be squashed, we've just come back with different forms. We've come back with private sector models, we've come back with peer groups, we've come back with different partnerships. We've continued to collaborate with the Royal College of General Practice. We've continued to collaborate with other professional bodies. And what we show is that we carry on being the legacy. And I think in the same way that this flower to the partisan was the memory that kept people's memory alive, in East London, we planted a memorial tree. And one of the things I said when we planted that tree was, and it was a tree planted in memory of all drug users who died in our area, and became a place where people would regularly leave ashes and come to commemorate the drug users who lived and died in East London. One of the things I said was, in times of war, we often don't have time to make proper commemoration of people. We often don't have time to build the memorials that we would like to do in peacetime. And we often just plant simple sticks in the ground to mark where people have fallen. And I was saying that I was really proud that what we'd planted in the ground was a living thing that would go on to live and be the testimony to those people's lives, so that people wouldn't forget those people and wouldn't forget their contribution and wouldn't forget why we evolved in the way we've evolved our services, because those people lived the lives and faced the troubles that they faced. But then I realised that the real memorial to all of this work is us. It's what we do. It's what you do every single day. It's every syringe you sling. It's every Narcan you give out. It's every piece of foil you give to somebody. It's every bit of education you give to people. It's every referral you make. It's every empathic engagement you offer. It's every drug user you treat with dignity and respect. That's the memorial to the tradition we all should be proud to come from. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you.